You know what I want? I want to talk to
Hello and welcome to the Raptors Extra Weekly Podcast, or Weekly Extra. I don't care. As long as you like it, I like it. Do your thing. But a very special episode wherein we are addressing the trade deadline, the fallout of it. Is there room for optimism? Is there room for pessimism? All that kind of stuff. And somebody who is of Raptors Twitter fame to some degree, Jacob Mack, wrote what I would call the Keeping Kyle Lowry Manifesto. He walks through all the benefits, all the great amounts of things that can happen when you keep Kyle Lowry and what that means for the future, what the risk would have meant to trade him, what type of return you're looking at, and why that wasn't worth it. Jacob, big fan of your work, although it is sparse lately.
Yes.
I really enjoyed the Google Doc, so I'm having you on to talk about it.
It was Notes app. It was actually a Notes app post. I was thinking of putting it on HQ, but they would not have paid me for it. So it went in the Notes app. I'm siphoning traffic away from my employer just out of protest. They should give me money. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
I want to start right at the top, and we'll just go, and I'll say Cliff Notes. Let's hear the rough, I guess, estimate of what you have written down there. And then we'll go through it one by one, and we'll pick up the points that I think could receive a little bit more attention. So your case in the minute to 2 minute range, and we'll go from there.
So what I was sort of looking at was that, like, I wanted to look at it from like a strictly kind of like dorky analytical perspective, like a Nate Duncan perspective, because I feel like once you start to inject emotion into it, like the Raptors' emotional attachment to Kyle, it just sort of becomes beyond the pale to trade him for a bunch of parts. Looking at the returns that were on offer, what you have is a lot of sort of marginal young pieces. Like, we're talking about Tyrese Maxey, Talen Horton-Tucker. It's just a matter of, are these pieces going to contribute to the Raptors core, right, of Fred, OG, Pascal, more than Kyle will? And I just, like, I don't think that's the case, right? Once you start to take things out of the optimal return, the return you're asking for, like Daryl Morey and Rob Poincaré, right, where they're just subtracting one piece or two, it stops becoming a trade that's offering more to the core. And then the other thing is that those things, the things that they would be getting have more team control than Kyle. But looking at the Raptors offseason, right? Lowry, realistically, if he's going to leave, he's leaving to win a championship, which means he's leaving to one of the three teams that were in contention to get him at this trade deadline, Miami, the Sixers, the Lakers. And two of those teams, we know they're going to be operating above the cap, right? The Lakers and the Sixers, there's no way for them to get under the cap, which means if they want Lowry in the offseason, they're going to need to do a sign and trade, which means essentially we get right back to where we are right now, where if they want him, they're going to have to give up, substantial assets. So you're going to recoup the value that you lost by not trading him in the offseason if he leaves to one of those two teams. And then with the Heat, you said to go over it briefly. I can't really with the Heat. It's more complex. Their situation has like a lot of decision points. But the long and short of it is, if they want to keep Victor Oladipo and also acquire Kyle Lowry, of course they acquired Oladipo at the deadline, then they're going to need to do a sign and trade as well. And the Raptors are going to be able to recoup assets there as well. So I sort of look at it like they're either going to keep Lowry or they're going to get something back for him. And then, like, looking at how they play this season, it's just a matter of, like, do you value the playoff run more than the marginal improvement in draft value that you get by trading Lowry? And I think that just because of the nature of this draft class, I think you kind of have to. I don't think you're really gaining a lot, especially since the Raptors are getting back a lot of, like, I think it's hard to imagine the Raptors are going to be worse in the second half, whether or not they trade Kyle Lowry. at the trade deadline, just because, you know, they had so much go wrong for them prior to the deadline that was like entirely outside of their control, not repeatable.
I believe that, you know, I've read through this a few times. The logic is sound basically at every point. The financials make 100%. It makes sense. And for anybody who's reading this, I'll post Jacob's tweet in the article that this gets posted with if you want to go run through it. But basically, there's 2 points that you have to believe to make this work, is that Kyle Lowry will still be valuable into his next contract. You have to believe that he will maintain his value as a basketball player going forward, that suddenly his contract, and this is, again, removing the emotion of it, right? This is the skim milk, cheersing, whatever it is, Danny LaRue, Nate Duncan.
Yeah.
So we're doing that. You have to believe that Kyle's going to maintain his value. And then the other half of it, well, I guess there's 3 parts. The second third of it is that you have to believe, yes, that the Raptors currently represent one of the worst records of all time, given their point differential. You have to believe they've been absolutely smashed by a Mack truck, there you go, by a Mack truck to get them to this point, that they're operating as a team at a much higher clip and just have been terrible luck has put them below. And you also have to believe what you're saying about the draft, that there's 5, 6 guys who would really be worth a tank, and the 3, 4 guys at the top are the guys who, if you were to get them, it kind of alters where your franchise is going because of the team control and their talent. So let's go in on I just want you to make your case for each thing, although I'm in total agreement on all 3 parts, but I'll let you make your case. So for Kyle maintaining his value, let's talk about that.
I think that with Kyle maintaining his value, obviously, you know, if you're a Raptors fan, you know he has the kind of game that ages well in terms of just being a decision-making, you know, like hub for your team and dramatically changing the way you play, but, you know, upping the tempo, you know, making reads that, you know, other guys couldn't make. This is the kind of stuff that you can continue to do in old age, because it's all about, you know, the way you process the game as a player. But more than that, I think it's something where it doesn't really matter the size of the next contract that he gets. He just needs to be productive. He doesn't need to meet the production. You know, he doesn't need to meet the dollar value of his next contract, just because the Raptors aren't a team that can do a lot with cap space, especially not this coming off season, right? He needs to be not a higher value contract than you know, the competitive, you know, the other guys that they could sign this offseason. He just needs to be better than them. And I think that he's a guy where you're going to have to pay like $20 to $25 million for him this offseason. And he might not be worth that 2 years from now, but I think it makes sense to look at his game and say he's still going to be a good player. And I think that just in terms of like the straight up player value of a guy like Tyrese Maxey, yes, he can eventually be good, but we're talking like 3-4 years from now when he's playing at a starter level, right? That's when you're getting the most value out of him. It's not, you know, next year, the year after, right? And I think that that's what you're really looking at with, you know, the Raptors' current guys. Like I said, they're, you know, 26, 27. In terms of them as a core competing in the playoffs, right? The next couple of years is like kind of what you're looking at as, you know, what you're gunning for. And then beyond that, it's you know, it's hard to plan for, right? You don't know what, you know, Pascal's aging curve is going to look like, what Fred's aging curve is going to look like, what, you know, whether OG has another year, right? In terms of the, you know, it's nice to have, you know, young guys just as a contingency plan. But I think that in terms of the very, you know, sort of immediate future, that Kyle is going to be more productive than the alternatives.
I think that's a point well made, is that you, as you say, you don't know what's going to happen with Pascal or Fred. You don't know how they age. You also don't know if OG, a guy who is, you know, slowly upping that usage percentage. And I think there's, on a play-by-play basis, OG can give you a lot of stuff to think about as far as what his ceiling might be. But you kind of step out, you zoom out, and you look at his statistical profile and his his play type profile, and you say, what's really sitting here? And he has to do that kind of stuff on a more consistent level to make you think that you have to add right now, big time, and that's what's going to happen with it. And as far as, Tyrese Maxey, those types of guys, we get excited, and like NBA Twitter guys like myself who like to obsess over like the Rashawn Holmes push shot or Etwan Moore and his floater. Tyrese Maxey is like ready package to be obsessed about on Twitter because he has like those funky little shots and he's got like that floater game, but he also doesn't get to the rim a ton. Like his free throw rate isn't that great. And you have to wait to see if he develops into something meaningful because if
absolutely.
you are,
you see guys like that, like De'Aaron Fox, he came into the league and he had an incredibly low free throw rate. Like I remember he was a guy I was really down on because I remember thinking, contact aversion is like a really harmful trait in guards. D'Angelo Russell was kind of like my touchstone for that, where like he had a lot of time progressing as a scorer just because he was so contact averse that he had trouble getting to the rim. But Fox, what happened is, he developed that ability to draw contact. And I absolutely think that Maxey can be a very good player. It's just a matter of he needs to develop physically, right? He's 20 years old. For his style of play, which is, absolutely slashing, a slashing guard. He's not a fantastic shooter. He's not likely to ever be, a guy who's just, dusting you from outside. He needs to develop a lot physically. He needs to, develop in terms of his, decision making, in terms of his comfort level with drawing contact, and that's going to take, a lot of like substantial reps and a lot of more time in the league. And I think, like I said, I think people are just have a sort of wrong-headed perception of, where this Raptors core is at because they were all much older guys when they entered the league. And so really they're just, they're guys who are entering their prime or, in sort of the height of their prime more than they are, developing players, even though they've only been in the league, 5-6 years.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And that's Tyrese. Is he going to be good enough that he carries that next era? And if he's not, then he has to be good enough to add more than Kyle Lowry does currently. And looking at it, it's hard to bet. Like, of course, any player at any point in time could be like the next big thing, of course. But if you're looking from the probability, you're trying to suss out what makes sense. I think it does make sense to say that Tyrese Maxey is not going to be transformative, and he's not going to provide more help to the current roster, the current core than Kyle Lowry. So, yeah.
I don't want to rule out the idea of like Tyrese Maxey becoming a superstar, right? Like, because you look at like a lot of these guys and, Alan Horton Tucker, there's a reason the Raptors were intrigued with them, right? It's just that is such a slim possibility that, the amount you're costing yourself in the present when, again, for this core, the time is now, next year, and the year after, right? The amount you're costing yourself in the present in terms of production, it's not worth the chance that you hit a home run with one of these guys, especially since, like I said, you're only getting, one or two shots at it, right? Like with the Sixers, you're getting Maxey in a pick. With the Lakers, you're just getting Horton Tucker. With the Heat, we don't even know what their offer was. Like it was just Duncan Robinson or something. Like, come on, that's the Heat's offer. Look, there was nothing there from what I can tell.
I think I can move us to this team. Probably they're good enough to make the playoffs. If you're listening to the podcast, then you probably listen to the podcast regularly. You've heard me make the points of why they are still a good team at this point, and they have that huge hole at the 5. But Jacob, if you could make your case for why the Raptors are too good to even tank with or without Kyle Lowry.
Well, I think that it's a matter of like how, like, first of all, obviously they've lost their games by very slim margins. They have that point differential, but it's also, you have this run to the bottom of the standings that happened entirely while a bunch of guys were out with COVID, right? And if you look at the drivers of the Raptors' success this year, it really has been more Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam than Kyle Lowry. Mm-hmm. And I think that, getting those two back, it takes, they were in the playoff picture, they were in they got as high as 5th place, I think.
I think 3rd. They actually, for like a night, they were in 3rd.
Yeah. So they not that long ago, they were right up there in the playoff picture. And so, regardless of whether or not they have Kyle on their team, I think it's hard to imagine that they're going to have a similar record post-trade deadline as they had pre-trade deadline. And I think that once you get into, that 6 through 9 range in this draft class, right? Once you get past the Cade Cunningham, the Evan Mobley, the Jalen Suggs, the Jalen Green, people talk about Jonathan Kuminga in the same breath. I don't know about that, but, once you get past that point, it's just like, why am I even here when I could have been 2 spots higher and played in the play-in game? Because like it's like just a free opportunity to make the playoffs, and if it doesn't work out, you're back in the same spot as a team that landed 6 through 9. And so I think keeping the present value, right, keeping Kyle Lowry, giving yourself the opportunity to sneak into that playoff game and sort of get the best of both worlds, where you can be in the lottery if it doesn't work out, and if it does work out, you're in a first round playoff series. I think that makes sense for the Raptors as a team that are better than the record and that can punch above their weight, given the right set of circumstances.
I think it's especially important with Pascal because you wonder his playmaking this year has been, I think, severely underrated, and you wonder if that playmaking bent will help some of the playoff struggles, like that on-ball creation that he kind of struggled with last year. And some of that is not to get in the armchair with psychology and all that kind of stuff, because Pascal's mind is his own. I have no idea what's going on there, but was in a bit of a funk personally and on-court wise. So you get a little bit more of, let's say, what would it be? A runway to see what's happening with Pascal in a playoff environment. And if he performs really well, you can kind of paper over and smooth over all of this anti-Pascal sentiment that's in the fandom and all this really harsh goings on with Nurse, because obviously there's something going on there. Right. And it just gives you an opportunity to operate with a little bit more clarity as far as like Pascal, OG, and Fred. And that's worthwhile, I think.
Yeah, I think knowing what you have is important in those 3 guys, because with Pascal, like a star level player, you really only have this year and last year to look at in terms of handling that level of usage. And it's also for Pascal, if you go into the playoffs as an 8 seed or a 7 seed, right, just having the opportunity to have a playoff series with like very little pressure, very few expectations, right? Because I think if you want to like put yourself in that armchair psychologist position, right, you get the feeling that he was very disappointed with himself following last playoffs and having, a less, like I said, less expectations. It could be a chance for him to play, more freely, more confidently, which could be really beneficial to him.
I suppose the next thing then is, so the draft, just you touched on it a little bit, but just make the case for the top 5 and let's say like the next 7-8 guys after, what you're seeing there and why the Raptors aren't gaining that much.
Everyone knows the top, like they have their top 5 set, not necessarily what order it's in, but they have their top 5 set. So Cade Cunningham is like, he entered the college season and people sort of perceived him as like a Ben Simmons type, a bigger point guard who, had a bit more of a jump shot, but was like a very stellar defender, could just like make really remarkable reads, excellent handle for his size. He's shown less explosion than a guy like Simmons in college, but he himself to be like maybe the best shooter in the draft class. Like he is just an incredible off the dribble shooter. He looks like a guy who could end up being, a Paul George type, which is bizarre for a guy who entered, college, with maybe some Ben Simmons comparisons, but he's a guy who may be limited in terms of rim pressure, in terms of just beating guys straight up off the dribble, but a phenomenal pull-up shooter, relatively good decision maker, an elite defensive player. Evan Mobley is just an outstanding mover, an incredibly, heady player for his size, 7 feet tall. There's some questions, obviously, similar build to someone like Chris Boucher, where he's very narrow in the hips, not going to be able to add a lot of weight. So whether he plays full-time at the 5 or splits time between the 4 and the 5 remains to be seen. But he's someone who's just like, a lot of nascent skills, a really good head for the game, incredible mover for his size. Jalen Suggs and Jalen Green are ludicrous athletes. They just dust people off the dribble, just first step and they're gone. Jonathan Kuminga he's got some problems as a shot maker, but remarkable, like a really good athlete, really like stout, strong, good defender, flash some playmaking, good handle for his size. And then there's like no consensus whatsoever past Kuminga what the sixth pick in the draft is, right? Like I've seen guys who are mocked at sixth in certain drafts be mocked at like 20th,
Garuba is like a guy like that.
Yeah. Usman Garuba, who gets like mocked in the lottery in some drafts, mocked like mid-second round in others, right? There's absolutely no consensus. The moment you get past pick 6, I think most people would have Scotty Barnes there, who can't shoot like at all and does not have center size. And it's like, yes, he has a lot of other skills in terms of his ability as a ball handler, his ability as a passer at 6'8", 6'9", not like a super high level, in spite of the fact that guys with that skill set often are, and just like a lot of questions with someone like him. Jalen Johnson is also mentioned up there, who stopped playing for Duke halfway through the season. I don't want to say that anyone who doesn't play college basketball is like not an NBA prospect. Obviously, college basketball is kind of exploitative and shitty, but like at the same time, it means the sample size you have for evaluating him is really limited. And I don't think he I think he was kind of abysmal on defense when he did play for them. So it's just like you have you have 4, at least for me, 4 really good prospects. One, guy who you would be comfortable picking like second or third in a normal draft in Kuminga. And then it's just like completely flat, I would say, until like the late teens. After that, you're not really gleaning any sort of advantage by picking 6th as opposed to picking 11th, 12th. You might lose the guy you were eyeing, right? If you have like a good eye for the draft, like Masai Ujiri, right? And you're picking 13th and, you have one guy you really like and he goes at 11th and you don't get him, that kind of sucks. But I think that's really the only way. If you have a specific guy in mind, that's really the only way you lose value. And I think it's with the clusterfuck this draft becomes after 6, it's hard to have a specific guy in mind unless you're me and it's Kai Jones and you think he could be a superstar. But he's going to be there when the Raptors pick. So they're going to pick him.
There'll be like Kai Jones, Keon Johnson. There'll be guys with like that incredible profile that you can say, you know what, we'll swing for them, and maybe they become the point you make is, I think, a salient one. A good one is that, it's flat between 6 and 20 or whatever it ends up. Okay. Any other thoughts on the Kyle Lowry situation, or else we'll move on to the Norm Powell trade?
Like putting away my glass of skim milk, putting away my Nate Duncan hat. I'm just so happy they kept him because he means so much to this franchise, right? He is the greatest Raptor of all time. He's the reason I'm a Raptors fan. I think the same is true for so many people in this city. And to see him get an opportunity to still have that hope to cling to of him rounding out the whole rest of his career with the Raptors, won't be a lifer, but is one in spirit if he gets the chance to do that. I think that would be so cool. And I'm glad that they didn't panic because the first half of the season went badly. Yeah. And that they kept him around. It just means so much to this team.
If you had a really, really nice trade package, sure, then you move Kyle Lowry. If he really wanted to go somewhere else and he thought and Kyle Lowry, the franchise feels indebted to him in some ways and should. And so if he really wanted to go and was like, I need to go, I want to try and win one somewhere else, then I think you try and make that happen too. But it appears that neither of those situations came about. So you stand pat. Masai Ujiri in his press conference said they are really biased about Kyle Lowry's trade value. And you should be. To trade away an icon like that, you should get the farm or somebody else's farm or some sort of feudalism or whatever,
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk Norman Powell, who's I tweeted about this and I thought, this is when you trade Powell, because I think that his value was somewhat inflated because some of the low-hanging fruit offense was coming to him that really juiced up his numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody, and this is a disservice to it seems like a disservice to other organizations because you imagine they do their homework, but on some level, point per game brain does leak into the mind of a GM, especially for optics and stuff like that. So
Absolutely.
you wonder if Norman Powell is worth more now. And it appeared that he had been. The Adrian Wojnarowski, Zach Lowe saying somewhere between like 14 to 18 teams were inquiring and package ready. And the one the Raptors settled on, Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood for Norman Powell. I'm aware that you do not like this pick, this trade, the trade they picked, let's say. So The floor is yours. Let's hear it.
I do think it lines up with them sort of hedging and understanding that they have a chance to make the playoffs this year because Trent can immediately come in and fill the same sort of, like, Norm's core role within the Raptors offense is as an off-ball mover, a guy who operates out of handoff sets, right, flare sets. Trent is going to come in and he's going to do roughly the same thing in that capacity. He just has none of the ancillary skills that Norm has on offense that really differentiate Norm from your average movement shooter. And I think it ties back to Norm being like a genuinely outstanding athlete from a first step perspective, right? Where he's a guy who can catch the ball, and if the defense has overcommitted even a little, he's gone, right? He's like he has like 2-3 steps on them. He's right at the basket. He applies a ton of rim pressure and is like a guy you do have to close out on hard. But really, he added more value. He added more or as much value as a guy who applied rim pressure, scored at the rim, as he did from behind the 3-point line. And I think with Trent Jr., he's strictly a shooter, right? If you close out on him and you close out on him well, he's going to have to put the ball on the floor. And then once he does, you're comfortable with that as a defense because he's going to get as far as the foul line. He's going to have to pull up, or he's going to have to go to a step back 3-point shot. And I think that, that for the Raptors, given that they have essentially been flinging up threes all season long, have had very little in the way, like Pascal's put pressure on the rim, but that's all translated into kickouts. They've had very little actual scoring at the rim. I think that this trade, really turns them into a team that's like single-minded in terms of how they score and where they're, threatening. I don't know that there's necessarily a way for Trent to develop much of a game inside of the arc based on what I've seen, right? His handle seems relatively loose. He's not an exceptional athlete. We don't really have a sample on him as a playmaker, just because it's not something he's done. Maybe he'll get more of those opportunities here. But and then I think defensively it's kind of a wash. What I've seen from Trent is he's probably going to make you want to tear your hair out less than Norm, but I think Norm is prone to just like losing his man. Trent, to me, from what I've seen of him, he overhelps in a way that's like really toothless. Like he'll sink really low, but he's right in the defender's field of vision. He's not creating steals or deflections, and it's just giving the other team, open shots. It feels like a guy whose understanding of defense is like fairly rote, right? Like he knows, okay, I need to rotate, I need to be here, and now I'm here and I'm not actually impacting the play in a meaningful way, versus a guy who has a more intuitive understanding of defense, who hasn't, like, this is a cliche, but who has a nose for the ball and can actually go and impact the play. He's kind of a zero defender, so like a no impact defender. So I think it's kind of a hedge, right? Like an asset management play where you're accepting that you're getting a worse guy, but he's younger and he's cheaper. So we're losing a little bit, but it's just a little bit rather than losing everything.
Yeah, I think it's 100% the point you make, and a point I've gone on about endlessly, probably in every episode of Reaction or weekly podcast. The Raptors don't have rim pressure. Their offense is homogenous, and there's very little in the way to produce that on the roster, because you look at their guys who are on the end of the bench, undrafted guys, very specific skill set guys who are all stacked on top of each other. Stanley, Yuta, even Paul Watson to some degree, even though he has a bit of on-ball wiggle, there's a hesitancy to get downhill from all of those guys. And Bembry can, but he doesn't have the jump shot. And he has like a lot of those fill-in skills that he slides in very nicely next to guys like Pascal when they're operating on ball with a modicum of success. But he's like a guy, he's a connector. He's a conduit for a lot of plays, a swing pass guy. And yeah, Gary Trent Jr., as far as guys who are closing out, provides very little in the way of danger if he's attacking the guy's wrong foot and getting downhill. As you say, is he getting stuck at the nail? Is something going to happen where he can't get all the way to the rim? And what happens with guys, like, for example, when I was younger and I was watching DeMar DeRozan for the first time in my life and seeing how he finished so athletically at the rim, but I kept wondering why guys who couldn't jump as high were getting to the bucket and finishing with less resistance than he was all the time. Right. Finally realizing, the first step, and then learning how important that is. Norm's is quite remarkable, actually. And he can turn the corner on guys that, in a way that a lot of players can't. There's that dunk on Anthony Davis, and you don't get to those points on the floor without bursting past guys. And Gary Trent Jr., as far as coming off of pin downs, dribble handoffs, he's not going to provide that same amount of pressure. With flare screens, with forming up off of drives and relocating, I think there's quite a high ceiling for him to fit in next to Pascal and Fred. But as you say, you're just adding to that same element of your offense. And the Raptors, are you just going to keep supercharging your three-point offense and see where that gets you? Because being homogenous, not having any diversity or versatility, it'll kill you in the playoffs. It'll make it really, really difficult because teams will just extend their shell a little bit and you'll just be walked into mid-range jumpers that basically nobody on the roster wants to take. And so that'll be interesting. But as you say, I think it is a hedge, younger, restricted versus unrestricted. And the Raptors kind of say, we'll be able to make this work. And Gary Trent Jr. in his interview today was talking, or his media availability was talking about the Raptors player development system. And it's become a cliche at this point. Players come and talk about that when they come, but who's to say? Maybe something pops off with him. But I do like his on-ball defense. He has some really dominant stretches. But as you say, the toothless help, how he operates in the scheme, he had a few big games around the bubble, and they were national coverage games. And so it takes very little for a guy to earn a defensive reputation. I mean, Norm had one for like 3 years longer than he probably deserved. And it's Gary Trent Jr. is coasting on that right now. Of course, there's playoff defenders. There's guys who are way better when, the intensity gets up. But Trent Jr. probably has to operate on a more consistent level to surpass where Norm was. And we'll see how it works.
What I've heard about him is he's an effort guy. He is a really high effort guy, which is a great place to start defensively, right? Like you cannot be a good defensive player if you're not trying. And if a guy has a reputation for trying hard, he's always going to have a somewhat inflated defensive rep. But yeah, I think that his on-ball defense is going to be less valuable to the Raptors than it was to the Blazers, just because the Raptors have guys like Fred, have guys like OG. And it's going to be the fact that he's young gives him an opportunity to, he is going to have to grow as a player if he is going to get past Norm defensively, because he's going to be used in a different role. His strengths aren't going to be, I don't think, quite as maximized in Toronto as they were in Portland. And in Portland, he wasn't, statistically wasn't an impactful defender, right? Like they were atrocious with him on, they were atrocious with him off. I just think that if you're going to trade Norm, I think that maybe my gut reaction to the move was like, okay, so they're it's all downside, right? Like you want some kind of upside in terms of like you ending up with like the best player in the trade. And I just don't feel like there's ever a point in their next contracts where Gary Trent Jr. is a better player than Norman Powell. It's very hard for me to envision that. Norm is only going to be 30, 31 by the end of his next contract. Trent is going to be 26. And then Trent is probably not going to be on the Raptors anymore after that. Kind of tough. Also, I don't know if Trent is necessarily cheaper after next year, just because I think that if I'm a team like the Thunder, right, and I have a youth fetish and $60 million in cap space, right, I'm going to offer Gary Trent Jr. 15, $18 million a year and end up with him. That's a dorky concern, right? That's just a matter of him eating up some luxury tax money, him eating maybe they have to sign a guy with a taxpayer MLE as opposed to a non-taxpayer MLE. It's not a big deal, but it's hard to see where the Raptors being 3 years down the line, the Raptors being really happy about this trade, as opposed to something like the Rivas Vasquez trade where they got 2 picks and they both hit, right? And you're we made out like bandits. I don't think there's a world where that's the case with this trade.
I think that's fair. And it's all dependent on what Gary Trent Jr. becomes, basically. And that's especially when, as you say, there are markers to look for. And the markers aren't always predictive, but they are more often than not. And their guys there's always exceptions to the rule, but the markers are not indicative of Gary Trent Jr. exceeding Powell's offensive output. And defensively, I think it's conceivable that he'll exceed him, but to the degree that he's a better player or much better at that point is maybe a little bit tough to swallow, especially when you consider the cost of Powell should have been quite high given his standing as a scorer. And he was scoring at a really ridiculous rate. The efficiency he was doing it was crazy. I thought you made a tweet.
24% usage, 65% true shooting, something like that.
Yeah, pretty bonkers. You had a tweet maybe a week ago talking about how Tobias Harris had a similar output to Norm and he received, a much bigger package. The Clippers obviously sending him to Philly. And I have a sneaking suspicion that if Philly had traded for Gallinari instead of Tobias Harris that year, they would have won the championship. But I mean, I guess the Raptors won instead. So that's not too bad either.
As an off the catch, he fulfills that sort of same offensive function, just as an off the catch scorer, a 2-3 dribbles guy, similar to Harris. And I think it's just a matter of teams sort of looking at a trade like the Harris trade where, you're getting these sort of more narrow players. You're overpaying for these sort of narrow players and just realizing that, those guys aren't ultimately the what makes the difference in the playoffs, right? Those guys, playoffs are about your kind of polarizing your outcome, right? Being as having the highest possible ceiling and just hitting that as frequently as possible. And that's more to do with your very best players than it is to do with your role guys. Your role guys are always going to be making very relatively small differences.
Which is why a team should have brought out the piggy bank for Kyle Lowry, but they didn't.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because he transforms the way you play. He completely alters your play style, right? He lets you do things that a slightly better movement shooter does not, right? In terms of upping your pace, just as
he might make a couple of units viable that wouldn't have been otherwise. And then you're getting, even in a playoff game, 4 to 5 minutes of a lineup that's operating at a way higher clip. Even when Philly lost to the Raptors, when they had Boban on the floor or Greg Monroe, that was a tragedy for them. And if you have somebody who can help transform a player like that just for a couple minutes at a time, you don't lose that part of the game, and then you can dominate elsewhere. It's a big deal.
He's also the kind of player who's much better on a good team, right? Kyle is, where he's, especially as a defensive player, where if he is your the guy with like the least defensive responsibility on the floor, which I think in certain lineups for Philly he could be. He is just like so disruptive in terms of like drawing charges, obviously is what he's known for, but just like blowing up all sorts of actions as like, and just finding areas to overhelp, kind of the opposite of Trent, where it's all intuitive, right? It's all stuff that like me as a normal person just like wouldn't think to do, and he just kills teams on stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. Like Norm he's just kind of like a better version of what you already had. Same with Tobias Harris. Like he doesn't add a different angle for a team. He just makes them marginally better. And I think that in terms of, really unlocking a new level and taking a conference finals team and making them a championship contender, right? I think that that's more what you're looking for at the deadline. And I think that's maybe why teams are a little more hesitant to offer the farm for someone like Norman Powell as well, as he's been scoring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because Kyle, he wins you the battles in the unforeseen margins and the seen ones. It's just, it's his value, I think, remains underrated, as it has been basically his whole career. There's a case that he's been a top 10 player of the past 10 years that will never be made in popular media. But I think for those who are paying attention, it isn't a wild take and it's something to contend with. But okay, before we let you get out of here, Gorgi Jiang has been waived by the Grizzlies. He made it into your manifesto as a contingency. Like, hey, this thing should probably happen. The Raptors with Gorgi Jiang, if that comes through, how do you view the team? Why do you want him?
Well, with Jiang, it's kind of like what they were hoping that they would get out of Baines, I think is what Jiang would provide. Baines has been like genuinely, like legitimately one of the worst Raptors ever to receive consistent playing time. I know people are like really hyperbolic about that on Twitter, but like it is legitimately the case. He has been so bad. And if Jiang can just be passable, right, as a guy who can space the floor a little bit, actually catch passes when he rolls, right, provide some, like on defense, provide some level of shot blocking, of rim protection, of rim deterrence, right, and be a guy who is like actually large, as opposed to Chris Boucher, who you can put in traditional center matchups, who more than being a guy you can put there, being a guy Nick Nurse trusts to handle those matchups. That's really what matters. Then I think that just it changes so much, like, because you're not having to drag this like massive weight around in the form of Aaron Baines just to be able to match up with teams with more traditional like interior threats. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm a big fan of Jiang. I'm surprised that he kind of fell to the wayside with the Grizzlies, because I think he's still valuable on a team that wants to win games. That blows my mind a little bit.
He's totally fine. It's just the Grizzlies have they have Jonas. Then they want to try out Brendan Clark at center. Then they drafted Xavier Tillman. I think they signed Killian Tilly and Jonte Porter to two-way contracts. They just have this huge overabundance of big men, and he just ended up being the odd man out because he's a little bit older and they want to give run to their younger guys. But no, he's still a totally fine player. In every time he gets on the floor, he's looked like a perfectly adequate NBA player, totally fine fifth starter. And that changes everything for the Raptors if they get someone like that, just because Baines has been so utterly atrocious.
Yeah, it's tough to play. Some teams can do it when the guy is really, really strong defensively, like a monster. You have to be somewhat close to like defensive player of the year level defensively to allow the team to go 4-on-5. And you have to have uber creators on your team as well. And some people have walked that line, Andre Roberson for a couple of years, right? And teams have won with that. But the Raptors with Baines, the calculus, it just does not shake out. And I
No.
don't think it ever will this season.
I think it really hurts Pascal, right, as a rim
Oh,
scorer.
man, it kills him. Oh, my God, he dives in on everything, and he cramps every bit of spacing. It kills me, dude.
And I think, well, the other thing about Jiang, right, the reason you want to get him is if you want to unlock Pascal as a rim scorer, you do want, a space floor, you do want to play 5 out, and Jiang is a really good shooter for a big man. He has, I think someone called him a trebuchet once. He has a similar looking release to Chris Boucher, but it goes in. So, yeah.
It's a growing amount of trebuchets in the league. It's seen as a popular siege weapon. We'll see how long it lasts. But yeah, Rodney Hood as well, I suppose we should touch on. I think his skill set, and I'll just go first, Jacob. I think his skill set is really unique on the Raptors. There's a bit more on-ball craft than basically any other wing on the Raptors, although he has graded out as a truly, truly bad player this year, and his Achilles injury really hurts his performance. But as far as like his skill set, it's still unique, so maybe he'll have spot minutes. Like there was a game against the Mavs the other night where I watched, and Rodney Hood was in there for like from minute 5 in the fourth quarter to minute number 2, and then he was replaced by CJ McCollum. But he had a nice stretch, and guys can have nice stretches, and if they have a unique skill set on your team, maybe they find their way into minutes because the Raptors have so many they have so many similar guys as far as skill set. So we'll see. But he's been bad this year, I think is worth pointing out.
He's been pretty terrible. I think that if the Raptors hadn't landed on Paul Watson as the guy, if they were still searching, then you would absolutely give him a look because he has been productive in the past, and he does definitely have more on-ball chops than anyone, the Raptors could call on to play that sort of role. But no, I think that given that it sounds like Nurse from Quotes has decided, Paul Watson is the guy in that spot. You would hope that Hood's minutes stay relatively limited, right? That you can just give Watson the confidence to go out and keep playing, regular minutes, give him that sort of routine, and hope he makes good on the faith that Nurse has apparently installed in him.
And unfortunately, in health and safety protocol, he and Bembry tonight. So
then we can give Rodney a look, tonight.
Yeah. So we'll see. But Jacob, feels like a podcast.
Yeah, I think so. I should have worn something a little lighter. I'm starting to build up a sweat. So I'm going to go take a shower, get ready for the game.
Before we get out of here, thank you very much for coming on. But the floor is yours to plug away. Some people, if they don't want to plug their own stuff, they recommend a book or anything like that. So the floor is yours, mate.
I don't have anything to plug. I recommend, if I'm going to recommend a book, the most recent thing that I read that I really liked was something called the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. I'm a big, I like more serious stuff, but I also like pulpy, trashy fantasy. It's something that very clearly inspired the A Song of Ice and Fire books by George R.R. Martin. It came out a year prior. It's first-person epic fantasy, which I think is very interesting in terms of having not necessarily an unreliable narrator, but a narrator with a lot of character, where you can really it really feels like you're engaging with a person rather than something pulled back and omniscient. So I thought that was really cool for something like like I said, like the epic fantasy genre. So that's my recommendation. I have nothing to plug. I have not created anything in ages.
Except for the manifesto, which I enjoyed. And listener, I suggest you go give it a read. You'll have the finer points, I think, down. There's some cap minutia in there that it's helpful to just read through so you can sit with it and go, okay, this is why Dallas won't get him. This is why New York won't, or why the Heat, they'll trigger cap holds with Duncan Robinson or Victor Oladipo or whatever. So go read through if you feel like, if you haven't already, or if you feel like you want a little bit more information. But Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time, man. I've enjoyed this.
One thing I can plug is please follow me on Twitter at Jacob_M_Mack. There we go. That's it. That's my plug. We're done.
Yeah. And if you have trouble inputting underscores, just go to the article of this and I'll have it. You'll just be able to click his name and it'll take you right to the Twitter page and you can hit follow. But Jacob, thank you so much, man.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, listener. I hope you enjoyed it, whether you got into it in the morning or at night. Have a blessed day and goodbye. 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 Goodbye.